I mean, won't be able to get your questions very well, but you will hear my answers, so that'll be fine. Okay, what do you want to know?
Well, I read a lot of your credits, and I just wanted to know how do you differentiate writing between comics, TV, books? Like, what's the process?
Well, I don't really differentiate in terms of the stories. My job is always to tell as good stories as I can. What you're really talking about is format differences, and that just goes with whatever the property is. You write screenplays in one way, teleplays in another, comic book scripts in a different way. The easiest to write are novels because I'm the one who's doing everything. I don't have to worry about how it's going to look visually. If I want to have a scene with two people in a room talking, I don't have to worry about how that's going to look interesting from a visual point of view. I just have to tell the story and the dialogue as well as I can. And if it's interesting dialogue, the reader will come along with me. When I'm talking about comic books, that's probably the most restrictive because I write comic books in what's called full script, which I will write page 1, panel A. Spider-Man is swimming across the cityscape. It is daytime. Caption 1, I have got to get over to Parker Industries by 1 o'clock for that meeting with Tony Stark. Caption 2, then again, what am I going to do? Run into traffic up here? Period. Panel B, he lands on the roof of Stark Industries. That kind of thing. It's very, very restrictive. Screenplays and teleplays are a bit more freeing than that, in that you describe what's happening in the script and then you just do all the dialogue, and if you get to an action sequence, you describe the action sequence, that kind of thing. The only thing with screenplays and teleplays is length. You don't want to do a screenplay that's longer than 120 pages. If you're doing a television script, the time is even more restrictive because if it's an average show, you've got 22 minutes to do your story, which means that your teleplay better not be more than 32 pages or stuff's going to start getting cut.
I have a silly one that's a big argument going on. The color of Spider-Man 2099 suit, is it black or blue?
The color of Spider-Man 2099's costume?
Yeah,
it's bluish black.
Bluish black? Okay, it's been a big thing that's been going on.
Seriously?
Yeah, I was unsurprised.
Wow. I think it's really very, very dark blue.
Because it's like everyone uses like the black inking or the blue to show black, and that's what started the argument.
Well, all I can tell you is that I've seen people walking around in Spider-Man 2099 costumes, and they always have it blue, and it looks perfectly fine to me.
What would you give advice to a younger you starting out in comic books now? From the career you've had, what advice have you learned as possible pitfalls, mistakes that you made that you wouldn't want you to make again?
I wouldn't give any advice to a younger me because the younger me would be going, okay, come on, who are you really? A younger me would just not accept that this is me from the future. Plus, we've all seen enough stories where total shit happens whenever you go into the past and start mucking with the past to change the future, because everything becomes a horror show. Well, I mean, what am I going to say to my younger self? When you meet this girl at a Star Trek convention, stay the hell away from her because she will break your heart. Yeah, what a great idea. And then my 3 older daughters suddenly disappear out of existence. I mean, it's never a good idea to tamper with the future.
I'm always interested about fan encounters. So, do you have any memorable ones or any outrageous things you can talk about?
Well, there's a ton. The one that always sticks with me is I was at a convention in California. I was walking around with a friend of mine, Tom Galloway, and I was exhausted. It had been a long convention, and Tom said, you made a lot of people happy. And I said to him, yeah, but you're never going to hear from them. It's always going to be the one guy that I managed to piss off somehow who's going to get word out. And suddenly a guy walks up to me and he says, hi, would you mind signing my comic? And I looked at the comic. It was not one that I had written. It was not even one that I ever heard of. It wasn't from Marvel or DC. It was some independent thing. And I said, I don't sign comic books I didn't write. It's like I'm taking credit for someone else's work. And he says, well, I don't care, just sign it. And I said, well, I do care, and that's a problem. I'm not going to sign this book that I didn't write. Do you have anything else I could sign? He says, no, just this. And he's handing me the book. And I said, can we get something else? A program book, a piece of paper, a napkin. And the guy says, no, forget it. I'm sorry to have bothered you. And he storms off. And I turned to Tom and I said, there he goes. He got here late. The convention was over. But that's the guy. That's the guy who's going to go on the internet and say, I walked up to Peter David, who wasn't doing anything, and asked him to sign my comic, and he refused. What a dick. And other people are then going to chime in and say, oh yeah, I heard he was a real schmuck, like that. That's what always happens. And Tom was standing there with his jaw hanging open because I had been proven so 100% right. I have no idea if that guy ever actually did that, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least. But, you know, on the other hand, I have positive fan encounters, although sometimes they're funny. A guy walked up to me in San Diego and he said, Mr. David, I just want to tell you, that conversation we had 2 years ago in the hallway changed my life. You gave me such good advice. Now, I had no freaking clue who this guy was. I had no freaking clue what I had said to him. But I sure wasn't going to say that, because that might send him right back down the rabbit hole for good. So I just said, thank you very much. I'm so glad to hear that. I'd often wondered if things turned out okay for you. And he said, oh yeah, everything's great now. And I felt so good. I also felt a little guilty. But, you know, my presence has helped people, and my presence has pissed people off, which I guess when you think about it is pretty much all that anybody can do.
With all your screenplays, all that stuff in the comic, is there any like one story that you regret maybe telling a different way you should have done, or something you felt you wish you could go back and change?
There's always regrets.
Of course.
I'll give you, for instance, some years ago, I had published a book called Nightlife about King Arthur returning to modern-day New York and running from there. And the book was published by Ace Books. At a party at a science fiction convention, I ran into my editor for the book, and I said to her, you know, Nightlife has been out of print for a while. We should really bring it back into print, and I would love to go back and just do some updating on it. For instance, when I wrote it, people were sitting there using typewriters. If we're going to republish it, I'd rather change it to computers, you know. I like to update the tech. And she said, you know what, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. So I went back to my original manuscript to start updating it. And I read it for the first time in something like 15 years. And I was appalled by it. It was so badly written. I mean, not badly written as in, my God, this guy doesn't know how. I mean, not like, you know, Twilight badly written. But the story wasn't told properly. There were points where I had done shortcuts because I didn't either have the knowledge or the patience to tell the story correctly. And I contacted the editor and said, it's going to take me a little while longer to fix this than I thought it was going to be. And she said, fine, take all the time you need, like a month. And so I went back into the book and I did massive rewrites to the book. The original manuscript was 65,000 words. The final new manuscript was 95,000 words. By the rules of the Hugo Awards, it would have constituted a new work and could have been eligible for a Hugo. And when I sent the revised manuscript to my editor, she loved it so much, she said, what would you think of doing 2 more? And we would have a trilogy. And I said, fine. And that's where the other 2 Nightlife books came from. But yeah, whenever I look at my older work, all I can think of is, damn, I was really so restricted by my ability as a writer at that time. There's maybe a handful of work that I'm completely satisfied with the quality of the writing. Future Imperfect, a Hulk story I did with George Perez. Atlantis Chronicles, which DC is finally collecting as a trade after a mere 25 years after my writing it. The entire Fallen Angel series. You know, that's again as good as the writing is going to get. And other stuff, I'll read it from time to time, and of course I have no idea what's going to be happening. You know, and I'll go like, oh, this is good, this is bad, this could have been better, that sort of thing. But the bottom line is writing is a constantly growing process. If you are a writer and you are satisfied with everything that you've done in the past, you're just not doing it right.
Hey guys, that's our 10. Would you like to go on, or would you like to head back to your table?
Let's give it till 10:30.
10:30? Okay, I'll be back at 10:30, guys. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Speaking of your works, with the way Kickstarter is now, maybe comics is, we can all make our own comics, I make my own too.
Yeah.
Is there anything you now want to bring to life that you now have the ability to do?
Oh, I'm doing that already.
You do?
A group of my friends and I formed a group called Crazy 8 Press. And we publish the books that the publishers can't be bothered to produce. For instance, I wrote a book called Pulling Up Stakes. It was the story of a guy who's a young vampire hunter. His mother is a vampire hunter. All of his friends and neighbors are vampire hunters. Here's the problem. He's a vampire. And if anyone finds out, they'll kill him. So he has to live his life in the coffin, so to speak. And I sent this around, this was sent around to publishers, and the publishers basically all said, no, we can't do this. This just turns all the concepts of vampire stories on its head. We can't do this. If we're going to publish a vampire story, it's got to be a young woman who's in love with a dark, brooding vampire. This is much too tongue-in-cheek to be a vampire story. Also, vampire books have to be written by women, which I thought would come as big news to everyone from Joss Whedon to, Bram Stoker. So, when you're dealing with publishers who are just making shit up, you feel like, okay, fine, screw you, I'll publish it myself. And Crazy 8 published Pulling Up Stakes, and a number of my other titles that publishers couldn't be bothered to handle. And they're doing perfectly fine.
Thank you.
What are some of your favorite comic book titles that you haven't read?
You mean titles in general, like what I'm reading now?
Yeah.
I like Dan Slott's Spider-Man. I'm enjoying that. I am, to my astonishment, enjoying Aquaman from DC, which is surprising, because Aquaman is a very personal character to me, so I really like what they've been doing with that. I like Invincible. I think that's what it's called. Jupiter Rising. That's right. Those are a few off the top of my head. Elf Quest. I like Elf Quest. I love Elf Quest. But Wendy drew that on. I mean, it's a tattoo now, but Wendy Pini drew that on. So. And only the video will have it. My wife has a matching one of Cutter. Okay.
So if you had free reign of any comic character to ever write, who would be your favorite to write?
Doc Savage.
Doc Savage.
See, that's the answer I give now. It used to be that I would refuse to answer that question, because here's what happened the first time I answered it. I don't remember what character I said. Let's say someone said, who would you like to write? And I said, Thor. I'd love to write Thor. And what happened was that was transformed into Peter David hates the guy who's currently writing Thor and would love to take the book away. And suddenly, I have this guy coming to me going, what the hell, dude? Why are you criticizing my work on Thor? And I literally had no freaking idea what he was talking about. And I said, I'm not criticizing. I love your work on Thor. Then why did you say you wanted to write it? I said, when did I say oh my God. And I realized what had happened. So after making amends, I didn't answer that question for a number of years, just to avoid getting into a fight. But I've come to the realization that no one's doing Doc Savage right now, so I can say Doc Savage and not get in trouble.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
With all the creative titles that you've worked on, you've been able to establish, has there ever been a story that you wanted to go back to that you don't feel like you really got to finish the way you wanted to, like maybe you were off the book sooner than something you had hidden in there?
No, I've always managed to finish pretty much everything. Not exactly. I mean, many years ago, in my run on the Hulk, I had Betty get pregnant. And I had a whole story that I was going to do with that. And then Marvel said, no, she can't get pregnant. She can't have any children. You know, the Hulk is never going to be a father, which breaks me up because now he's got, what, 3 kids? Yeah, he's got 3 freaking kids. Yeah. But back then, the Hulk could never have a child. So that story had to be scuttled. I did actually write the story in which Betty loses the baby. Bob Harris came in and wrote that. I have not read it to this day. The only issue of Hulk I have never actually set my eyes on. But then again, I wound up taking that story and telling it in What Savage Beast, the Hulk novel. Marvel didn't care about that because that was outside of continuity, so I could do whatever I wanted there. When I was first writing the Star Trek comic, I was embarking on a lengthy storyline and then the book got canceled. Oh well, except then I was approached by Dave Stern, who's the editor of the Star Trek books at that time, about writing a Star Trek novel. And I said to him, I have a great original series story, and I figured I would just continue my story. And he said, I'm not really looking for, he said, right now I've got enough original series stories for the next 2 years. But if you could write a next-gen story, I could have that on the shelves in 6 months. And I said, did I say original series? I meant to say Star Trek The Next Generation. And then I simply continued my story over the time jump into Next Generation, making it quite possibly the longest chronological continued story that I've ever been a part of. If I have ideas that get scuttled, I always find ways to use them elsewhere.
2 minutes, guys.
Okay, let's go. What else we got?
I just wanted to ask about, with all the recent adaptations and everything, is there a story that you want to see adapted onto television or to a movie?
Yes, Fallen Angel. I would love to see Fallen Angel adapted into a TV series or movie. And I'd like to write it and make all the money.
I actually don't have
Okay.
With the state of the industry, everyone keeps talking about it's the end of comics as we know it. And you've been around long enough. What do you think the future is? Will Marvel stop making monthly and go to graphic novels? What do you see the future person is for comics?
People have been talking about that it's the end of the comics since the early 1990s. I am concerned about the skyrocketing price of comics driving the fandom away because the people who are currently buying them can't afford to keep buying them. The people who might be our new readers won't even start because they don't want to plunk down $3.99 and $4.99 for basically 8 minutes worth of entertainment. Why should they do that when they can plunk down $24 for a video game and get hours and hours of entertainment? What I think may eventually happen, and I hope it doesn't, but what I think could eventually happen is that comic books will wind up being published only online. And the online books would then be collected into trade paperbacks. That's going to be a bitch for comic book stores because they would no longer be selling monthly titles, they would just be selling trades. And I don't know if they can survive. But on the other hand, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trade paperbacks out there. So it's entirely possible that, and now the problem is that bookstores are also seem to be going out of business. I think that it is possible for the industry to survive, but it's going to be a dicey few years, and every time the price on comic books go up, that's another reason for fans to stop buying them. I also think that comic books should try to do a way of letting people know that the comic books are out there. I first found out about comic books when I was watching the George Reeves Superman television series, because at the end of that series, it always said, Superman is based on the character appearing in Superman magazines. And I said, there's magazines? And I wanted to go to seek out the magazines. And that's how I first found out that comics existed. I really wish that on our various TV shows and our movies, we had ways of emphasizing, go check out the comic books. I remember when I was in a comic book store, and there was a kid there with his mom, and he said with great surprise, Hey Mom, they have comic books of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too. He didn't know there were comic books. He had no idea it originated as a 3,000 run comic book. He only knew it from the TV show and the toys. Now we've got to do whatever we can to let people know that these comic books exist and find ways to put them into their hands as inexpensively as possible. I'm going to go to my table. Take care, guys.
Thank you guys.
What
Hey,
table
you guys
you
wanna
at?
hang tight for a
I'm
second?
at
I've got some
table
updates for you.
H31.
How much is it to do a signing at your table?
Yes.
Of like, how